Good morning, and welcome to today's State and Federal Program Directors Meeting. I'm Adrienne Balcazar, and I would like to introduce the LCAP State and Federal Programs Unit. Joining us from the team is Helen Choi,
Good morning.
Laurel Estrada,
Good morning, everyone.
Augustine Garcia,
Happy Thursday, everyone.
Rachel Garcia,
Good morning, everyone.
Anita Lomali,
Buenos días.
and Tina Park.
Good morning, everyone.
And joining us from our support staff is April Grease.
Good morning.
To access today's presentation, we ask you to click on the link in the chat, and this will take you directly to the slides. If you use the link on the slide, it will take you to our Canvas page where the presentation can be accessed through the icon as shown here, as well as any shared resources. Today's topics on our agenda will be the LACO Wrightwood Outdoor Science School, presented by Gerardo Salazar, direct services and administrative costs, Title I Part A rank and serving requirements, Title II budget updates, the FPM update on equipment inventory, and the LCAP update, the implications for year 3, looking at the goal analysis prompt 1 and prompt 3. And then we end with some reminders regarding the arts, music, and instructional materials discretionary block grant, the educator effectiveness funds, and the Proposition 28, the arts and music in schools. We ask you to please place your questions in the chat box, and we will answer any simple questions if we can. We will follow up with the written responses in a Q&A that will be emailed to you and also posted. We are recording today's training and will also be posting this on our website. And now I would like to introduce Gerardo Salazar, who will be sharing information about LACO's outdoor education programs.
Hi, good morning, everybody. I'm Jerry Salad. You can call me Jerry. I know that second R in Gerardo could be hard to for some of us to pronounce. So Jerry's fine or Gerardo, either way. I answer to both. So wanted to talk to you guys today about the outdoor education programs at Los Angeles County Office of Education. So we do have 2 programs, and we have the Marine Science Floating Lab, which is goes out of Long Beach and the Port of Los Angeles. Yes, we do put students on a boat, and they go out into the Port of Los Angeles and Long Beach, and they explore different ecosystems, the coastal ecosystems there. And we do take students to our campsite in Wrightwood, therefore the picture there to your right. So that particular site is about 6,000 feet above sea level, which is kind of a very different environment that for a lot of our students. So Tina, next slide, please. So what I've always loved to talk about, I've been in outdoor education for this is now my 17th year. So we take students typically, this is a satellite shot of one of the schools, many of those, it could be a satellite shot of many of our schools in Los Angeles County. So we take them from this type of environment to, next slide, to this type of environment. And this is what I consider a brain considerate learning environment for many of our students. So what's nice about these environments is that even though many people would think that this is a very distracting environment, it's actually quite the contrary. Next slide, please. So the program at Outdoor Science School and pretty much anything that we offer with outdoor education really focuses on the foundation of next generation science standards, and in particular, Earth systems. The focus really is on 4th through 6th grade, with an emphasis on leveraging the outdoors to support just a general literacy, English language arts, mental health and wellness, and social emotional learning. So I'm an English language learner myself. So we do have a lot of students that do not speak English or have a basic understanding of English that thrive in a lot of these environments because they are actually learning the vocabulary and applying the knowledge and use of the vocabulary while engaged in real-world observations or investigations. So I'm going to show you what I'm going to show you. Next slide, please. So the Marine Floating Lab is really interesting because, yes, so like I said, we put students on a boat, and there are 5 stations on this floating lab. So in any of these stations, students actually do research. So the big I guess the big picture here is that they learn about the coastal ecosystems and how they interact with them, and precisely, specifically, how are students interacting with their particular with not only just the oceans, but also in their own environments. So they relay a lot of these environmental literacy and what they call environmental principles and concepts to their daily lives. So in the floating laboratory, students board a whale watching vessel. And the vessels go through rigorous Coast Guard certifications. They all have floating devices, and they do get a safety talk at the beginning of each voyage or each trip out. We never really leave the breakwater, but you would be surprised how many species, ever since the port of Long Beach and LA got cleaner, we do see a lot of dolphins, sea lions, and a lot of different marine mammals. And we also put a trawl net out, and the students watch us put the trawl net out there, and we haul in a catch, and the catch is then put into different tanks. We keep the animals alive, and then they observe these animals. Some of the animals we don't need to, let's say we'll catch about 17 stingrays. Well, we release 16 of them and allow the students to basically look at one and they even touch them. So we do this in a very safe environment, making sure that the students are able to access having these animals in front of them and understand how to safely handle them, not only for the safety of the students, but also we want the animals to go back to the ocean alive. So we do have permits to be able to do this. And this, I say, there's a point there where it says that we do active research. And in a different station, by the way, we have marine biologists that talk about the catch from the trawl net. But once students move on from the trawl net station, they move on to a plankton station where the students actually do a plankton pool. And that's just a fancy word for we're going to catch plankton. And then they review this under a microscope. And then they identify the different types of plankton and microinvertebrates that are that they're able to see in these microscopes. And they will also notice there might be some microplastics. And they look at the different evidence to climate change or climate literacy, and they decide whether there is or there isn't evidence of it. And then they move on to another station where they do a sediment pool. They basically get a large, for lack of a better way, saying metal jaw that gets dirt from the ocean floor, and they investigate what that sediment looks like. And they will find out there's things living inside that mud, and they explore that as well. So they go through 5 different stations. I'm not going to go through every single one of them, but because I could be here all day. But at the end of the day, they get some wonderful opportunities to do some research that they wouldn't have otherwise. So because we are also in the Port of Los Angeles, students also get to see the many opportunities that they have for careers. Some of the captains that are work in the Port of Los Angeles, for example, we talked to them about some of the tug pilots. The tugboat pilots are those really slow boats that help those enormous container ships come into the dock and into the port. Well, those pilots make about $500,000 a year with overtime. So those are wonderful careers. You don't have to go to college for it, but you do have to make sure that you seek the right vocational training to do that. There are tons and tons of wonderful job opportunities and career opportunities, high-paying career opportunities in the Port of Los Angeles and Long Beach, and students get to learn about those while they're on the boats with us. So, and the next one, yeah, go ahead, next one. Thank you. So when it comes to outdoor education, I love to really hone in on the fact that it's a multi-sensory environment that's conducive for all learners. So if you're a visual, kinesthetic learner, basically when you're outdoors, you are all your senses are enlivened. You're basically because of just the way your neurons and your brain is working, your brain is really on the whole time you're out there. In particular, it's also on because it's an environment that you're not used to being in. So when it comes to being in the one of our most unique locations, that would be our camp in Wrightwood. So the camp sits in the Angeles National Forest, where, like I said, we're about 6,000 feet above sea level. It doesn't snow often. It did snow a little bit this year for us, and it lasted about a week, and it went away. And let me tell you, when the kids do see it snow, they love it. So they don't care about the slush on the ground. They just want to be out there and just be out in the snow. It's a very unusual experience for them. In these types of programs, students are there. Usually, typically, our most popular program is the 5-day program, where students arrive on Monday and they leave on Friday. Yes, they do spend the night, and teachers do spend the whole week there as well. But mercifully, teachers have a separate cabin, so they're not in the same cabin with the students. They get their own space. The students do have many experiences out there. There's about 7 miles worth of trails that they get to experience throughout the whole week. Some of those trails, if like right now, there is still snow on the ground at the 6,500 foot level, and students actually do get to walk up to the snow. And there's not much powder up there right now, but it's enough for them to say that they touched it. So some of the wonderful experiences that kids have there is they get to, what for many students, it's the first time they're in the mountains. And it's many times that the first time that they also get to interact with students in a non-formal school setting. So there are other benefits in addition to the next generation science standards. Everything we do in outdoor school, can you go back to that one? Everything we do at Thanks. Everything we do is designed to create an emotional connection to learning in the outdoors. And the reason we want to have for everyone to have an emotional connection to learning is that if once an adult is no longer teaching, many times if they are emotionally connected to something, they will go back and research it on their own. And that means that they are going to be active learners of the subject content. So we really hone in on a lot of the brain science that tells us that if students are really interested and attentive and emotionally connected to whatever the subject matter they have, that they are going to retain that information for a longer period of time. So to that end, we are now conducting pre and post surveys and are finding out that students are retaining information, that next generation science-based information, about a month and a half to 2 months out after their experience with us. So, and let's say, I'm trying to look at that. So in addition to the 5-day program, we also have 3-day programs and 4-day programs. But like I said, the majority of our year is focused on 5-day programs because that's what really creates an impact. And to that, and I'll give a little anecdote. Like I said, I've been in this in outdoor education for many years, and I run into people that had outdoor education experiences as children, and they're now adults or even administrators here at LACO. And they'll stop me on the hallway and say, "Hey, Jerry, I went to a camp. I went to the camp that you operated previously when I was at LA Unified." And they would tell me, "I went to Clear Creek and I still remember it when I was, back when I was in fifth grade. It was the most memorable trip I ever had as a elementary school student. So, and 30 years later, they still remember it. So, we're very proud of all of those anecdotes. Next slide, please. So, again, students, we like to say that science is the verb, and we also do say that science is also a team sport, because we try to make sure that students understand that you gotta, in order to have critical thinking, you need to test hypotheses, you need to argue from evidence. So when we're doing that, you need to also be collaborative. So we do the science, but also we do a lot of note taking and notebooking and journaling. So from that perspective, there is the English language arts component. There's a math component because we do quite a bit of estimation, especially when it comes to our night sky study. And we also make sure that students are constantly in a position to make a mistake. It's okay if we make mistakes, or we'll make a incorrect inference. It's because science is about sometimes you trial and error. And when you're out in the field, our educators really are very good at making sure that they create an environment where a mistake is not something that kids should not be worried about. If you're not making mistakes, you're just not trying hard enough. So we want to make sure that students are in that safe environment where they're able to discuss different ideas and really foster that critical thinking. So from the perspective of next generation science standards, we're focused on transfer of energy and Earth systems. And there's evidence of all of these, all basically throughout our whole campus. We have a large campsite, but in addition to the campsite, we have access to basically the rest of the Angeles National Forest. And within that forest system, we have access to 3 separate ecosystems. Okay, next. So when it comes to the non-academic portion of our programming, we do exert a concerted effort into mental and physical health. We are focused on leveraging the outdoors to support mental health and just overall wellness, right? So with every time that we start an activity, there is a mindfulness experience or mindfulness exercise that students participate in. And the reason we try to do that before we do that once in the morning and once in the afternoon and once before lights out. The reason we do that, it's twofold. One is for students to be able to, it's one of the social emotional learning competencies. And if they are able to assess that they are feeling, for example, anxiety, if they're feeling self-doubt, if they're feeling even anger, they're able to self-regulate. So we're trying to help support students with those skill sets by engaging in different types of exercises, mindfulness exercises, but also by doing it regularly, it becomes a habit and it allows students to give each other grace or permission to do it. And it's no longer something that it's going to be made fun of. So that's one of the reasons why it's become such a big part, and it's become then teachers have told us that they really enjoy that aspect of our program. The social emotional learning aspect of it that we're focused on during the time they're with us is growth mindset. Students are in an environment that they're typically not in, and some of them may come in and they may be homesick. They may be dealing with a difficult situation at home. And in many cases, this is the first time that they're away from home. They have to plan the clothes they're going to wear the next day, or what are they going to, nobody's going to tell them what they're going to eat or not eat, right? So they're making a lot of decisions on their own during the time they are with us. So that creates a lot of growth opportunities for them. And we speak growth mindset at camp. So if a student says, oh, I'm not very good at that, or I'm not very good at hiking, I'm not very good at math, our staff will say, well, you're just not there yet. So yet is a word that's used a lot at our campsite. And then the shared experience is really formative to have a very positive mindset when the kids go back in the culture of the classroom. We've had a lot of anecdotal reports stating that the culture of the classroom changes significantly. So we know that there's a lot of research that shows that whenever a group of humans have a common experience that's out of the norm, they tend to bond. And that's typically what happens with a classroom of fifth graders or sixth graders that go to our sites. When they go back, there's a lot more empathy, there's a lot more cooperation, and just the general learning environment improves significantly, according to a lot of the teachers' reports. Next slide. So we are in our sign-up period right now. And if you would be interested in signing up to either the outdoor science school or the floating lab programs, that would be the link that you would go to, and then just tell us what you would be interested in. And we will go ahead and send you all the information and confirmations. I'm looking at the chat, and I will be answering all those questions really soon. Next slide. So for more information, you could email us at outdooreducation@laco.edu. And or you can just give either our secretary, Elizabeth Kites, a call, or you can always give me a call as well. Open to any particular. I know that many schools are very they have different populations, and you may have different questions, but and I'd be happy to address them. And next slide. Okay, go back. I'm so sorry. I thought that was that. So the one of the things I will go over is our fee structure. This is a fee-based program. The fee structure for the 5-day program is $475 per student, which puts us at what that includes is a week-long program. Kids come in on Monday, they leave Friday. That includes their meals. That includes room and board and all programming. The 3-day is $315, and the 4-day is $375 per student. We are at about 80% capacity right now in terms of our enrollment. So we do have some space, but I am aware, I do think that we are going to be full for the 26-27 academic year. When it comes to the Marine Science Floating Lab, it's also a fee-based program. So the fee-based program for that is for 60 students. It's $3,400. That includes all instruction, the boat fees, and our instructors are all marine biologists. For 30 students, it would be about $2,400. So those are the fee structures on that. If you would like more information, please go ahead and email me. And I'm going to be looking at let me take a look at this real quick, some of our chats. So I saw the student to teacher ratio is 25-1. I saw that question, and I went over the costs already. So the other question is Clear Creek available for charter schools too? So Clear Creek is an LA Unified program that I used to be a part of, but now I'm with LACO. So we operate Outdoor Science School in Wrightwood. So the Wrightwood program, yes, is open to charter schools. Again, it's open to any school within the boundaries of LA County. Looking at other questions.
I see, Jerry, the question, what grade levels? I see one
Right.
slide referencing grades 4 to 8. Is there also one for high schools?
The Marine Science Floating Lab, we typically do get high schools on that one because a lot of the concepts For example, a lot of the marine biology programs do love to leverage our boats to do that. And if there is a special request or a request for us to do some activities, or in one case this past year, a school wanted to leverage the boat to do an underwater remotely operated vehicle or an underwater rover. We have accommodated that as well. So for the Marine Science Floating Lab, it's 4th grade through 12th grade. So again, our program is the Outdoor Science School, OSS, not Clear Creek. And it is a wonderful learning program. So the information on the fees will be in the slide deck that's going to be shared with you all. I didn't do that in time, so that was my bad. Oh, and it's also on the chat. Let me see if there are any other questions. Do schools have to bring their own cabin leaders to Wrightwood? Yes, they do. So we do ask that schools bring their cabin leaders, and it's typically high school students. Many school districts leverage high school students and the fact that high school students need to provide service hours, and they're allowed to go on these trips. Some high schools actually leverage their leadership program to go on these trips as well. So it's a wonderful opportunity for a lot of the high school students to become mentors to younger students and be and to take care of a lot of their service hours. Let me see if there's any other questions.
I didn't see any.
That's it. So
Yeah.
if there are any other questions, please feel free to give me a call or email the outdooreducation@lakewood.edu. Like I said, this is a wonderful opportunity for a lot of students, and in my previous stops and even now, a lot of the principals have told me that this is a very inclusive type of program for all learners. And also, in some cases, it's become a rite of passage for many schools. So with that, I thank you for your time and welcome any questions in the future or any inquiries. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jerry. What a great outdoor opportunity for students. Makes me want to go now. Well, thank you so much. And we will forward any questions that we get through our chat after after your presentation. And then again, everyone has the contact information so they can reach out to you directly. So thank you. Okay, moving on. Today I'm gonna share about direct services and administrative costs. So when implementing federal programs, direct services are supportive activities that are delivered directly to students to improve academic achievement. When defining direct services, it's critical to note that direct services are typically delivered at the school site. The direct services occur when the student is the direct recipient of the service or the beneficiary of the service provided, such as through professional development or a parent involvement activity. The personnel are providing the direct hands-on service to students, and the direct services may be provided to students by personnel such as maybe a specialist, a resource teacher, and/or instructional assistants. The funds are used to purchase materials and equipment to be used by the eligible students, and equipment such as computers or particular software to maybe provide that activity would be allowable, and that would be considered a direct service to students as long as it meets the educational needs of those eligible students, and it's supported by that student data and as an effective practice. With administrative costs, this is a general term to reflect any cost associated with the management or the administration of that program. Administrative costs are the cost of personnel and supplies, which are by nature administrative, and they really don't have a direct delivery to the student in the program. The administrative costs must support this program, though. And within the administrative costs, there are direct costs and indirect costs. Direct costs are costs that directly support the program, which can easily be traced to the specific federal program and is directly beneficial to that program. Examples of this are program staff salary and benefits, program-specific equipment, materials, travel, and consultants. Indirect costs are costs that are agency-wide. They're general management costs that support the program, but cannot be directly associated to that specific program, such as payroll preparation or someone in the accounting department, or even processing in the procurement department utilizing your procurement system. So again, these are indirect costs. So indirect costs have an indirect cost rate, and this is a percentage that is used to recover the indirect costs. An indirect cost rate is a standardized method of charging individual programs for their share of indirect costs. An estimate of indirect cost is reserved at the beginning of the year and then charged at the end of the year based on how much funding was actually expended from that federal program. The California Department of Education calculates the indirect cost rate for each LEA as authorized by the U.S. Department of Ed. The approved indirect cost rate for the 26-27 school year has recently been posted on CDE's website, as you can see here. The link listed on this slide will take you to the webpage with the spreadsheet that lists all of the LEAs in the state and their indirect cost rate. Here are some key points to remember. Again, the indirect cost and the rate are used for agency-wide general management costs. The indirect cost rate may not exceed 5% of the total grant award or the CDE's approved indirect cost rate, whichever is less. It's also, you must use the approved CDE indirect cost rate for your specific district or charter. And then the LEA may claim up to its approved indirect cost rate unless there is a specific authority or legislation or regulation to limit the rate. So if a federal program has an administrative cost limit, such as Title I with the 15% cap, then this means indirect costs plus the direct administrative costs cannot exceed 15%. So an example of this would be if an LEA has already spent 12% on direct administrative costs, then it can only claim 3% for indirect costs, even if the CDE's approved rate exceeds 3%. So again, each program has its specific limits or regulations. And so for more information on this, we encourage you to watch our fiscal workshop presentation that is posted on our Canvas webpage. And now Augustine will go over the Title I ranking and serving requirements.
Thank you, Adrian. Good morning and happy Thursday, everyone. And yes, like Adrian mentioned, I'll be going over Title I ranking and serving requirements. So first, let's review what ranking and serving is and why it's a critical part of the Title I program. Ranking is a process that districts must use annually to identify high poverty schools that are eligible for Title I services. There are several sources of allowable data to use for this process, but in most cases, free or reduced price meal data is the most accessible and most commonly used by districts. The numbers are based on students ages 5 through 17 because that's what's used for Title I allocations. Serving is the next step. So based on ranking, districts must determine which schools will receive Title I funding and be served in the coming school year. We say districts because this typically doesn't apply to charter schools because LEAs with less than 1,000 students or single school districts are not required to rank. And the purpose of ranking is to ensure that Title I funds go to schools with the highest percentage of low-income students. And all rules, they push you in that direction. So like I mentioned during the previous slide, most districts used free or reduced price meal numbers taken from CalPADS using the age 5 through 17 count. Because current year CalPADS numbers aren't reported until October each year, prior year's CalPADS numbers, which have been certified, should be used. In the WinterCon app, CDE pre-populates these numbers when you're reporting the results of your ranking. Keep in mind that if you use other numbers for ranking purposes, you'll need to change the pre-populated numbers and you'll need to maintain documentation. So we recommend not changing the numbers and then unless there's an extenuating circumstance because one, you'll need to change the pre-populated numbers, and two, changing the numbers can impact the school's eligibility and can potentially disrupt school programs after they've already started. And three, changes in school eligibility will impact the compliance of the school. So for example, re-ranking with new numbers can mean that a school that was originally identified could fall out of ranking. So like, would you pull funding mid-year? And how would you account for the money that has already been spent at a school if it's no longer a Title I school? And how would you account for services that were or weren't provided? And will this put you over that 15% threshold for carryover? A lot to think about if you change those numbers. All right, so let's review the rules for ranking and serving. So first, districts start by ranking all schools based on their poverty percentage using the same data for everyone so the comparison is fair. From there, any school with a poverty percentage at or above the district's average poverty level is considered eligible for funding. So naturally, the highest need schools come first. So any school with more than a 75% poverty rate must be served before moving on to the other eligible schools. There's also some flexibility for secondary schools. Districts can choose to serve any middle school or high school with at least 50% poverty before serving other eligible schools with lower poverty rates. After that, if funding is still available, the remaining eligible schools are served in order of poverty. Now, when it comes to ranking, districts can either look at all the schools across the district together or group them by grade span. It's also important to note that districts don't have to fund every eligible school. However, for any school that is funded, the allocation has to be meaningful, enough to support a program with the size, scope, and quality needed to close achievement gaps. So finally, there's a safeguard around equity too. If a district chooses to fund any school below 35% poverty, then the funding level for all eligible schools must be increased so that each low-income student receives at least 125% of the district's average allocation per eligible low-income student. So here are some reminders about other funding requirements. The first one is that 85% of your whole Title I allocation must be used at Title I schools for direct services to students. To reiterate what Adrian just shared, direct services are services where the student is the primary recipient of services. This has also been described as including parent engagement and professional development activities related to instruction. Also, the per pupil amount, or PPA, for school allocations may vary by school, but only if the PPA for higher poverty schools is higher than the PPA for lower poverty schools. Okay, so let's take a look at how this fictional district ranked and served its 6 schools using the district-wide model. So first, the district collected its poverty data. The district then ranked its schools in order of poverty from highest to lowest based on the percentage of students eligible for free or reduced price meals. The next step was to identify its eligible schools. So here, there are only 2 schools that are at or above the district's poverty percentage of 50.5%. Those 2 schools, Cortez Middle and Luxor Middle, will be served. Additionally, the district identified 2 more schools, we have Circa Elementary and Flamingo High, that are below the district poverty percentage but above that 35% to be served. So going back to step 6 in the ranking rules, which states that districts are not required to fund all eligible schools, Sahara Elementary, although above 35% and eligible, will not be served. Now, finally, Real Primary is under the 35% threshold, therefore it's ineligible and will not be served. Now, the total Title I allocation to this district is $1 million. But before determining the amount available to allocate to schools, the LEA must determine the amount of all required and authorized reservations, such as equitable services, indirect and admin costs, parent engagement, homeless youth, neglected or delinquent youth, and other authorized reservations, and deduct that amount from the $1 million prior to making our school allocations. In this case, this LEA is allocating $900,000 to schools. So with the ranking and serving already determined, this LEA proceeded to calculate its per pupil allocation as $603.62 per student. Knowing that the per pupil allocation for individual school sites can vary as long as schools with higher low income percentage receive a higher PPA than schools with a lower one, this district determined that Luxor Middle will have a higher PPA due to its higher poverty percentage and its lower academic achievement. At the bottom of this slide, you'll find a link that will take you to non-regulatory guidance for within district allocations under Title I Part A, with more scenarios like this one, including ranking by grade span and that 125% scenario that's triggered when serving a school under the 35% poverty percentage threshold. That was a lot. So let's review some exceptions that can be applied to these rankings, okay? So the first exception is the grandfather option. If you have an eligible school that was funded in the prior year and is now ineligible, you may fund them for an additional year. You can carry them for an additional year to help them draw down their Title I program. Another exception is if a school is below the district poverty average and at or above 35% poverty percentage, you may serve that school as long as all other schools with higher poverty have been served. And then there's the feeder pattern exception. This is for secondary and middle schools. If you determine that you'll get more accurate poverty data by using data from feeder schools, you may use this method to determine the poverty percentage of your secondary schools. And now let's talk a bit about that 35 versus 40% confusion, right? So these two numbers are often confused in the context of ranking and serving. So 35% applies to the minimum poverty level for serving a school without triggering that exception for schools below the district average and requiring that 125% funding. 40% is the minimum poverty level for a school to implement a school-wide program without a waiver. Anything below that requires a waiver to operate a school-wide program. So when should you rank? Well, we recommend starting the process early. Because ranking decisions can begin in the spring after October CalPADS numbers have been certified. Ranking should take place prior to the beginning of the school year so that your schools can be informed of their identification, have a current board-approved SIPSA in place, and begin services for students at the beginning of the year. So even though the ranking is done in the winter release, why should you rank early? Because if you identify any school that becomes ineligible for funding, you can decide not to fund them for the coming year or grandfather them for an additional year. And you can also identify newly eligible schools and decide if they will be funded, and to determine if district-wide or grade span ranking will be used. We also want to make sure school site councils are in place and that school plans will be revised and approved prior to the beginning of the school year to reflect our current needs and our funding amounts. So let's take a moment to reflect on your current ranking process and not just what to do, but why. So are you funding all eligible schools? And if so, what's driving that decision? If not, how are you determining your cut point? Is it strategic, or does it sometimes turn into spreading funds a little too thin? And what about your per pupil allocations? Are they the same across all schools? And if they are, is that really the best way to target your highest need students? Because ultimately, Title I is about impact. So when you're deciding how many schools to serve and at what level, are you ensuring the funding is enough to support a program with real size, scope, and quality? And then think about timing. When are you ranking schools and sharing that estimated funding? And how does that affect site planning and even carryover? That's why doing these things in the spring really matters. It sets schools up to plan more effectively and use those funds very strategically. And there are other factors that can affect your school level funding, right? So first, there's transferability. So that's the process of transferring money from Title II or Title IV over to Title I. You'll need to decide whether or not you'll transfer those funds into Title I, because if you do, how will they be used? Will they go to specific sites, or will they be reserved for district services to Title I schools? And there's carryover. Here we're looking at unused Title I funds from this year that can roll over to next year. Will those funds stay at the site? Will they get pooled or be reserved for district services? Once you've got your carryover squared away, it's time to adjust those schools' allocations. And finally, we have some bottom line questions for you to consider about whose needs are being met by your ranking decisions, students or the adults in the system. Are you ensuring your highest poverty schools are receiving adequate funding to implement effective programs to really close those achievement gaps? And are you notifying schools in a timely manner to allow them to develop a thoughtful, comprehensive plan? If so, I'm sure you are, you're likely focusing on student needs. And that concludes my section, and I'll hand it off to Anita.
Thank you, Augustine. Well, we wanted to take a moment to share with you some upcoming changes or enhancements to Title II, in particular as it relates to budgets. If you attended last month's All Title Conference, you may have already heard about these changes. Nevertheless, we think it's a good idea to bring this information to you, either because it might be the first time you are hearing it, or because a refresher is always helpful. So let us begin by grounding ourselves with the purpose of Title II, Part A. Title II is a federal grant that comes from the U.S. Department of Education to CDE and then out to LEAs for the purpose of strengthening the quality and effectiveness of teachers, principals, and other school leaders. There are 4 objectives to the grant. First and foremost, the grant and the allowable supplemental activities aim to increase student achievement. With this in mind, the grant is designed to improve not only the quality, but also the number of effective teachers, principals, and other school leaders. The grant also aims to provide low-income and minority students greater access to these personnel. And I always think of a sports draft when I think about Title II, Part A, a team or a school with students with high needs matched with first-round picks or access to highly effective instructional personnel and leaders. Now, remembering that Title II is a federal grant, you probably get a rush of federal regulations that immediately come to mind. And your first thoughts most likely involve paperwork and documentation. And you would be correct. Today, we're going to focus on the Title II Part A budget. As with any grant, there are rules to ensure that recipients of the funds comply with the law and the use of the funds in order to ensure alignment with the goals of the grant. Now, currently, as it relates to Title II budget in California, LEAs are not required to submit a Title II budget to CDE. LEAs are not required to include federal funds in their LCAP either. But this being said, it would be acceptable for LEAs to use internal spreadsheets to manage their Title II budgets. But always planning and looking ahead, we have been informed that in the future, LEAs will be submitting Title II Part A budgets to CDE. Not completely a seismic shift, but a shift nonetheless. An exact date of when this future begins has not been solidified, but CDE has shared that it may be within a 2-year time period. And in the spirit of preparation, why wait till tomorrow what we can do today? So as we prepare to submit Title II budgets to CDE in the future, please note the following. Currently, the Supporting Effective Instruction Program instrument for an FPM review, budgets are requested as evidence. However, this year and most likely next year as well, CDE reviewers are providing LEAs with guidance and support. Findings are not being written for this component, although there have been a few exceptions in very specific situations. If you are not in the cycle for a review, or you are not selected for an FPM review next year for SEI, CDE is supporting and collaborating with LEAs who wish to make sure that they are developing a budget that aligns with what they will be expecting. Whether you are in a review or not, know that CDE is providing this technical assistance to everyone. The assistance from CDE will not result in an approval or a denial of the Title II budget. Rather, the assistance will be in the form of coaching and support. CDE is thinking that it'll be about 2 years before this becomes a part of the CONAP. Nevertheless, it's never too early to begin. So as we think about effective stewardship of Title II funds, there are 4 key components that together create a strong, compliant, and strategic approach to budget management. And that raises an important question. How should you reevaluate the Title II budget you're currently implementing? The starting point is understanding the components that are required within a Title II budget framework. There are 4 key components, all grounded in the Code of Federal Regulations. Factors of allowability, specificity and clarity, expenditure documentation, and evaluation and reporting. Now, the good news is this: these components are not entirely new, and in many ways, they are already embedded in the work happening across your LEA. For example, when you purchase materials or you enter into contracts for professional development with consultants, you are already engaging in expenditure documentation through your purchase orders, your agreements, and your supporting records. What we're really talking about today is not building something entirely new, but strengthening, aligning, and making these practices more intentional, more cohesive, and more clearly connected to the requirements of Title II. So let's begin with allowability. When we talk about allowability, We are really grounding our decision in three core principles: necessary, reasonable, and allocable. First, necessary. Every cost should clearly support the intent and purpose of Title II, strengthening educator effectiveness and ultimately improving student outcomes. If that connection is clear, you are starting from the right place. Next, reasonable. This is where we apply the prudent person test. Would a reasonable person managing public funds make the same decision if the funds were their own? This is where we pause and really think about cost efficiency. For example, is it reasonable to send a group of educators across the country for professional development? Or are there comparable opportunities closer to home or even virtual that would achieve the same outcome at a lower cost? These are the types of decisions that define strong fiscal stewardship. And finally, allocable. A cost must directly benefit the Title II program. If that connection is unclear, it becomes difficult to justify the expense. In addition to these principles, we must ensure alignment with federal cost requirements, maintaining documentation like duty statements and time and effort records, and consistently applying your own local policies and procedures and generally accepted accounting practices. The second component of the budget is specificity and clarity. At its core, the component is telling a clear and complete story about how your funds are being used. The CFR outlines key elements that your records should capture: the amount of funds, how those funds are used, the total cost of an activity, the proportion covered by Title II when multiple funding sources are involved, and any additional documentation that provides context. But beyond compliance, this becomes a powerful management tool. When your budget is clear and specific, it guides decision making. As requests come in from schools, departments, or staff, you have a solid reference point. If an activity is included in your budget, you can move forward with confidence. If it is not, the answer is just as clear: it should not be charged to Title II. That doesn't mean that budgets are static. Amendments are part of the process, but starting with a clear and specific plan ensures that all expenditures remain necessary, reasonable, and aligned to the program. The third component is expenditure documentation. This is where your planning and your practice come together. You'll want to maintain records that clearly identify the amount, the source, and the use of Title II funds. These records should tie each expenditure back to the specific federal award and reflect balances, obligations, and actual expenditures. And the key idea here is simple: every cost must be supported and traceable. The good news is that you're not doing this work alone. Much of this documentation is already being managed by your fiscal and business services teams. This is a collaborative effort across departments. And if your LEA participates in an FPM review, it's important to remember that this is not just about compliance. It's also about support. Your CDE reviewer is there to work alongside you to ensure that your documentation is complete and aligned with expectations. Nevertheless, a big part of financial management is seeing that your expenditures are aligned to your budget. If under the general ledger, all of your Title II funds are in materials and supplies, and then funds are moved out throughout the year to other object codes, then CDE will see that as a clear indication that your LEA has not developed a Title II budget. Now, the fourth and final component focuses on evaluating and reporting the performance of grant objectives. This is an area that will be a significant priority for California moving forward. To demonstrate to our federal partners that Title II funds are being used as intended, and more importantly, that these investments are driving meaningful outcomes, we must ensure that we have strong systems in place to measure progress. This includes maintaining clear, consistent records and engaging in regular review cycles that support continuous improvement. These reviews should be happening at least once or twice a year. All LEAs should have a determined goal and know whether they are accomplishing that goal. If you're already doing this, great. But if you're not, that's okay. But you do need to begin. Measure your actions and what you are doing as a result of your evaluation of the progress. Revise your budget as needed. LEAs play a critical role in this process by not only monitoring progress, but also by refining project objectives as needed. The ongoing adjustment helps to sustain momentum and ensures that our efforts remain focused on improving student outcomes. So what could a Title II budget look like? This is a sample budget template that CDE has made available on their website, and we've included the link at the bottom of the slide for easy access. At first glance, it may appear fairly minimal, but that's intentional. It's designed to serve as a starting point. The template includes a space for an LEA narrative, identifies object codes, and provides columns for both cost and descriptions of allowable activities. Together, these elements help create a clear and organized picture of how funds are being used. You're welcome to use this template as a starting place or continue using a format that your LEA has already developed. The key takeaway is this: regardless of the format that you choose, your budget should clearly reflect all four components that we've discussed, ensuring it's compliant, well documented, and aligned to the intent of Title II, Part A. So let's take a closer look at the first section of the sample budget template. In the budget narrative, your goal is to clearly describe the strategies that will be supported with Title II Part A funds. This is your opportunity to tell the story behind your budget, why you're investing, what you're investing in, and why. You'll also want to include how effectiveness is measured. What metrics will you use? How frequently will data be reviewed? Being explicit here strengthens both your planning and your accountability. In addition, consider incorporating educational partner feedback that informed your decision. This doesn't require a separate needs assessment or additional meetings. Instead, you can draw from input already gathered through existing LEA processes and document how that feedback shaped your Title II priorities. This adds an important layer of transparency and alignment. But remember that LEAs must engage in meaningful consultation with educational partners, and educational partner input influences funding decisions. During an FPM review, you will be asked to show evidence that educational partner feedback was solicited. And finally, remember, you are not limited to a single goal. Your narrative can reflect multiple priorities, as long as they are clearly connected to your overall strategy and the intended use of funds. So here's an example of what could be included in the narrative portion of the budget template. Notice that the LEA has included a goal that is measurable and time-bound. Wonderful USD also is specific with activities and strategies that will be implemented to address the need. It is clear who will be doing what for whom and to what end. High-quality professional development and coaching will be provided to English and math teachers at the secondary level for the benefit of LTELs. We have specifics regarding the number of TOSAs, the location, and the content of the PD. Here's what a budget breakdown should look like. There is an object code specified. All funding sources for each of the activities is identified. This is a budgeted amount, not your estimated actuals, and the description section is specific and clear. There should be no doubt as to what is being paid for with the funds. If we look at object code 4200, we even see that the title of the books purchased are listed, as well as the quantity of each of those titles, specific and clear. Now, please note that a focus for CDE and California will be on the fourth budget component, evaluation and reporting. Connected to the narrative in the example we just looked at, you can see that the metrics are closely tied to the student group and the objectives in the budget. For your Title II budget, be sure to identify the metrics that will be used to monitor progress along with the baseline and progress made in future school years. Now, CDE has stated that they do not expect to see actions that are just one and done. Change does take time to evolve and develop. It's okay to have a multi-year goal. However, if you are still using Title II for the same goal for the past 10 years, then be forewarned that CDE will be suspect about that goal. Why is it not working? What needs to change? Or is the goal now part of your base program and thus Title II funds should not be used? Some key points to remember as we conclude this section. Not all allowable expenses are impactful. If something is too costly or not reasonable to continue, then the LEA should rethink that expense and look for expenditures that will have more impact. Remember that Title II funds are to be used to build capacity. This is usually not a one-day conference or one teacher at a school who learns a new strategy to be implemented in her class only. Capacity needs to be built school-wide or LEA-wide, and make certain that Title II funds support the needs identified from a needs assessment. And as always, costs must be reasonable, allowable, and necessary. Now be careful to ensure that costs supplement your base program and do not in any way supplant it. Now, if you are interested in working with CDE as you build a better Title II budget, we have several resources for you on this slide. First, we have a link to the CDE's webpage, and also you can email the Title II office for support. If you are not a part of their listserv, consider joining as soon as possible. Remember that we're entering the collaboration and support phase. Within the next 2 years, CDE has shared that they will be providing support and guidance. And as you build your Title II budget, ask for their guidance to see if you are on the right track. If we want to have good luck the next time we go through an FPM, we need to meet preparation with opportunity. Now is the perfect opportunity to prepare with CDE for a successful future FPM review. Thank you very much for your time and attention. Next is Laurel with information regarding FPM equipment inventory.
Thank you, Anita. Spring is a great time to look closely at your LEA's systems, routines, and procedures related to equipment inventory and management. So let's go over some considerations. There are some key points to address in your system for keeping track of equipment, maintaining control of it, and ensuring proper use of equipment that's purchased with federal funds. In subsequent slides, we'll provide examples and resources to support you in this work. LEAs must maintain an inventory of all equipment valued at $1,500 or more, including equipment placed at private schools. Please note that this minimum unit price threshold increased on January 1st, 2026 to $1,500 from $500. You must conduct and maintain documentation of a physical check of your equipment minimally every 2 years. But it's not enough just to conduct the physical inventory. You must also reconcile the results of that physical check with your official LEA equipment inventory list and complete any necessary follow-up. This is a step that's often overlooked and can result in FPM findings. And of course, systems must be in place to prevent loss, damage, and theft that include investigation, documentation, and potentially police reports. Equipment inventory management is a key requirement for federal programs. On this slide, you'll see the federal programs that are monitored for equipment management and the title of their FPM instruments. The equipment management required in California Ed Code is linked to this slide for your reference as well. The documentation that must be maintained includes a historic inventory of equipment purchased partially or entirely from federal funds and evidence of physical equipment checks every 2 years minimally. It's important to include any items that can walk away easily, such as Chromebooks or iPads. It's also important to have a written procedure for equipment management. It should include the process for conducting physical checks, reconciling the results, and the system for tagging equipment. The requirement for equipment management is explained in the Code of Federal Regulations and linked to this slide. As a reminder, it's not enough to have a policy that documents your system's routines and procedures. It's important to also have systems in place to provide training in complying with them, and then monitor whether they're being followed consistently. It's also helpful when staff understand the why for these processes and procedures. This slide contains all that needs to be included in an equipment inventory. Since there can be variances in different programs, it's important to understand the requirements for each federal program to ensure that the system in place is inclusive of all that is needed for compliance. A link to the FPM instruments is at the bottom of this slide. In subsequent slides, we'll provide samples of equipment inventories and management systems. Before we do that, labeling or tagging equipment properly is an essential part of an LEA's procedures that are in place to guard against loss. This is an example. Properly tagging equipment also facilitates the process for conducting regular physical checks. You can see that this equipment tag provides an opportunity to identify which federal funds were used to purchase the equipment, along with other data that relate to the written inventory. CDE provides this example of an equipment inventory spreadsheet. You'll see how the required components are represented in this spreadsheet and used to track items purchased through Title I Part A funds. It's important to remember that equipment and supplies located at private schools must be labeled with the LEA identifier and included in both inventories and physical checks, as they are to remain the property of the LEA. A link to an editable version of this particular inventory is included on the next slide, and it's available on our LACO webpage. The links included here are editable, not edible, versions of sample inventories. They are organized by program, FPM instrument, and the format they are created in. The first link is to the example reviewed in the previous slide. The next links are provided by CDE for specific federal programs, including Title I, Title III, and expanded learning. The last link takes you to a Word file that can be used as an inventory for various programs. As you reflect on your system for keeping track of federally funded equipment, consider the following. How is your LEA's internal control system set up to prevent against loss, damage, or theft? How does the LEA determine what equipment is needed for the implementation of your program? How does the LEA determine if other unused equipment is available prior to using federal funds for additional equipment? And how does the LEA ensure that equipment purchased with federal funds is used only for the authorized purpose? Remember, if equipment is lost, damaged, or stolen, you must investigate and document. To wrap this up, I began by saying that spring is a great time to re-examine your LEA's systems, routines, and procedures relative to equipment inventory and management. This slide contains some suggested spring tasks. Are your inventories and written procedures current? Are they understood by all who have a role in carrying them out? When was the most recent physical check? What's the plan for equipment storage over the summer? How are physical checks and inventories reconciled? How is that reconciliation documented? Every LEA has its own system for completing this work. When that system is documented and everyone involved knows their role and fulfills it, your LEA will successfully maintain ongoing compliance. And with that, I'll hand things off to Helen.
Good morning, everyone. So today I'll be focusing on what LEA should consider in this planning of the third year of the LCAP cycle. So in the current 3-year LCAP timeline, we're entering, again, year 3 of the cycle. And this is also known as the evaluation and refinement year. So during this time, LEAs reflect on the implementation and effectiveness of the 2025-26 LCAP goals and actions, while also beginning to, again, plan for year 1 of the next LCAP cycle. So next slide. So in the spirit of spring, as Laurel mentioned, I know many of you are actively working on your plans and as we speak. And remember that during this spring timeline, you also have many other things that are underway as you're developing the LCAP. So you might be working on, again, you're engaging educational partners in the LCAP development and you're drafting it for review. You are meeting with your required committees to get comments on your completed LCAP draft, and also you're preparing for your public hearing and your board adoption for the 26-27 LCAP. And you're also probably preparing for the local indicators presentation. And by the way, the local indicator reporting window will be available from June 1st through July 31st, 2026. And so this link to the LCAP timeline is also included on the slide for your reference. So I want to take you, I'd like for you to take a moment to look at the highlighted phrases from this excerpt from the LCAP instructions. So as you review them, notice the language highlighted here in red. Reduce disparities in opportunities and outcomes. Must change actions that have not been proven effective. So these phrases are explicitly stated in the instructions and are important to keep in mind as you reflect on your current actions and consider what adjustments may be needed as we move through this section. So the importance of year 3 is highlighted in the LCAP instructions. So beginning with the development of the 2024-25 LCAP, LEAs must change actions that have not been proven to be effective over a 3-year period. And for most actions in the LCAP, the 3-year period for evaluating effectiveness will conclude with the 26-27 LCAP. So when actions are deemed ineffective at the end of 26-27 LCAP, they must be changed in the 27-28 LCAP. And when an action is identified as ineffective, the LEA must describe the ineffective action, the reason why the action was ineffective, and how changes will result in a new or strengthened approach in the 27-28 LCAP. So why do I say all this when we have 27-28 LCAP one more year? Because year 3 provides an LEA an important opportunity to evaluate the implementation and the progress so far and make any course of correction before entering the next LCAP cycle. So where do we begin looking when we're looking for implications or effectiveness? It starts with the goal analysis. Remember that in goal analysis prompt 1, 2, and 3, it focuses on the 2025-26 school year, while prompt 4 addresses the changes made on the identified needs for the 26-27 school year. So prompt 1 must describe the implementations of actions, and prompt 3 describes the effectiveness or ineffectiveness of this action. So we have seen instances where implementation and effectiveness are used interchangeably. However, while they're closely connected and they inform one another, implementation and effectiveness are two separate concepts that should be clearly addressed in the goal analysis. So, what is the difference between implementation and effectiveness? First, implementations tells us whether we did the thing or not. So in other words, implementations metrics measure how well a program, process, or intervention is actually being put into place. So we're looking to see whether the intended activities or strategies are being carried out as planned. Effectiveness matrix, however, tells us if the thing that we did made a difference. So effectiveness metrics focus on the impact and outcomes of that programs or intervention. This means we're measuring whether the desired goals or objectives are being achieved, whether the action is producing its intended results. So for example, like think about Saturday school. From an implementation perspective, you might ask, did Saturday school actually take place? Were students able to attend? But when we shift to effectiveness, the question changes. Now we ask, did the students who attended Saturday school show improvement in their achievement? What was the impact or the outcome as a result of that action? So while the implementation and effectiveness work together, they answer two different questions. So what this means is that the metric you use to measure implementation will often be different from the data you will use to measure the outcomes or achievement. When you're looking at implementation, the goal is to determine whether the action was carried out with fidelity. In other words, did the program or the strategies or services actually take place in the way that it was intended? So some possible ways to measure the implementation of fidelity might include a checklist, implementation checklist to verify that the key steps were completed, classroom observations to see how strategy or practice is being carried out, maybe work samples to show what the work is taking place, usage data such as participation data or attendance in a program, or surveys and interviews that gather feedback from staff or students, or coaching logs from your PLC notes and documenting support and collaborations. So these types of measures help you understand whether the action was implemented as planned, which is different from measuring whether the action improves student outcomes. So to go a little deeper into effectiveness, remember that effectiveness is always measured in relations to the goal. So effectiveness cannot really be determined unless we clearly understand a few things. What was supposed to improve? By how much? For which students? Within which time frame? When those elements are clear, the goal becomes measurable and you can determine whether the action is actually producing the intended results. So those results might include things such as improved student achievement, reduced chronic absenteeism, increased graduation rates. So when we talk about effectiveness, we are really asking, did the action move us closer to achieving the goal that we set for our students? So to better even understand effectiveness, we need to ask important questions. How do we know this improvement wouldn't have happened anyway? So in other words, we want to avoid assuming that an action caused improvement when change may have occurred for other reasons. One way to do this is by making comparisons. One approach is to do before and after comparisons. Sometimes we call this the baseline comparisons. So here you compare your results from prior years and look whether the outcomes improved after the strategy was introduced. Another approach might be comparing across student groups. For example, you might compare classrooms or schools that participate in the strategy with the similar ones that did not. So you might and also target students that were received the action services from the action from the targeted students with non-targeted students. And another way to look at might be to look at state or district trends. So this helps determine whether the improvement is unique to the strategy or if it's a part of a broader trend. So for example, if the targeted student group improved 3%, but all the other students improved by 7%, the strategy may not be the primary driver of the improvement. So looking at data this way helps avoid drawing false conclusions about effectiveness. So now let's connect implementation and effectiveness. Remember, you really cannot determine effectiveness unless you first understand the implementation. And that means asking a few key questions. Was the strategy actually used as intended? Did the students receive the right amount of exposure? Was the quality of implementation consistent? When implementation fidelity is low, our confidence in the result is also low because we cannot be sure whether the strategy truly had an opportunity to work. So let's look at how implementation and outcomes work together. So when you have low fidelity of implementation with high outcomes, the strategy may not be the reason for that improvement. So it's important to investigate other possible causes for success. If there was low fidelity of implementation and low outcomes, this suggests that implementation had limitations. So the focus should be on improving implementation first, maybe such as adding additional training or time or support before evaluating the program itself. And when you have high fidelity of implementation with high outcomes, this is the ideal scenario. We want to suggest that the strategy is effective. So next step is to scale the strategy and monitor that sustainability. And high fidelity of implementation with low outcomes, in this case, this strategy was implemented well, but it did not produce the intended results. So this may indicate that it is time to rethink or maybe even replace the strategy. So as we moved into year 3 of evaluation and refinement, remember the phrases we discussed earlier about reducing the disparities in opportunities and outcomes. So a strategy is truly effective only if the gains are equitable, if the achievement gaps are narrowing, if the impact is reliable across different student groups. And this means that we need to look closely at outcomes across student groups such as race and ethnicity, their EL status, their socioeconomic status, or even whether or not they're students experiencing foster homelessness or in the foster care program or at different grade levels. Because if overall average improves, but the gap between the student groups widen, then the strategy may not be systematically effective, even if the overall numbers look better. So what does this all mean as we enter year 3 of the LCAP cycle? Especially as many of you are already actively drafting your LCAP right now, there may be situations where immediate action is required. This might occur when there's obvious ineffectiveness, such as there's been no progress after 2 years. Maybe there's something really even negatively done to the students. And maybe funding being used is no longer it was with no discernible outcomes. And in these cases, it may be necessary to adjust or change the strategy now rather than waiting. On the other hand, there may be situations where strategic year 3 monitoring is very appropriate. This may occur when data shows emerging trends such as mixed signals from year 1 to 2, or implementation has been moderate or inconsistent, or the need for year 3 outcome, that there's a need for year 3 outcome data to confirm whether the action is truly effective. So in these cases, year 3 becomes an important opportunity to monitor implementation closely and determine whether the strategy should be continued, strengthened, or changed in the next LCAP cycle. And remember, additionally, when we are talking about contributing actions, those that are principally directed for EL, low-income, and foster youth students, it is important to look closely at how we're measuring the impact for them. We should be asking key questions. Do the metrics effectively measure the impact of those actions? Is data available for the specific student group the action is intended to do? For example, if you consistently do not have foster youth data, it becomes difficult to determine whether the action is truly effective for that group. In those situations, it may be necessary to reconsider how the student groups are being measured in those metrics. And consider, again, are the intended student groups well represented in the metrics? And do they actually have the data to measure their outcomes? And what additional data sources could help strengthen and evaluate the action's effectiveness? And are the actions truly intended and principally directed towards EL, low-income, or foster youth students? And these questions help ensure that contributing actions are not only implemented, but that they are truly making a difference for the student groups that they are meant to support. So I want to leave you with this final thought. Year 3 provides LEAs with the opportunity to evaluate implementation and progress thus far and make course of corrections prior to implementing the final year of the plan, which drives the continuous improvement outcomes for students. Thank you, and now I will turn it over to Rachel.
Thank you, Helen, and good morning, everyone. So we're now in the home stretch. And so in this last section, we just wanted to share a few reminders regarding some upcoming deadlines. So there are a few state programs with approaching expenditure deadlines that we wanted to put on your radar. And the first is for the arts, music, and instructional materials discretionary block grant funds. And so these funds, they need to be fully expended and liquidated by June 30th, 2026. And keep in mind that any funds not expended by this deadline will need to be returned to the CDE. Additionally, there is a final expenditure report that must be submitted to the CDE by September 30th, 2026. And this is to document how the arts, music, and instructional materials block grant funds were used for allowable purposes. Now, for charter schools that close before June 30th, 2026, the final expenditure report must be submitted within 60 days of ceasing operations. We've included the link to the CDE web portal for the submission of this final expenditure report at the bottom of the slide. And it's also important to note that if an LEA does not submit this final expenditure report, it will forfeit all arts, music, and instructional materials block grant funds that were allocated to the LEA. Now, the next state program with an upcoming expenditure deadline is the Educator Effectiveness Funds. And so these funds, they also have an expenditure deadline of June 30th, 2026. So it will be important to expend all of these funds by this deadline because any unexpended funds will also have to be returned to the CDE. Now, for educator effectiveness funds, there is also a final data and expenditure report due to the CDE on or before September 30th, 2026. And so submission of this final report, it will also be through an online application. And again, we've included the link at the bottom of the slide. And then also keep in mind that if this final data and expenditure report is not submitted on time, then all educator effectiveness funds must be returned to the CDE. Now for Proposition 28, Arts and Music in Schools, there are several reporting requirements approaching. And so the first is for the annual certification, and this must be completed on the AMS portal by June 30th, 2026. Now remember, LEAs are required to annually certify that all funds will be used to provide arts education programs, and for LEAs with an enrollment of 500 or more students, that the LEA will spend at least 80% of AMS funds to employ certificated or classified staff to provide arts education programs. And then the remaining funds will be used for training, supplies, materials, and other educational partnership programs, unless a waiver has been granted exempting the LEA from this 80-20 requirement. Now, LEAs must also assure that the AMS funds will be used to supplement funding for arts education programs, and also that no more than 1% of funds will be used for administrative expenses, and keep in mind this includes indirect cost. Now, another reporting requirement for AMS funds is the annual report, and this report, it must be board approved and also posted on the LEA's website. The required information that must be described in this report includes the types of art education programs provided with AMS funds, the number of full-time equivalent teachers, classified personnel, and teaching aides providing arts education programs with these funds, also the number of students served with AMS funds, and the number of schools providing arts education programs with AMS funds. And keep in mind that the board-approved annual report, it must be submitted to the CDE on the AMS portal by September 30th, 2026. Now, another reporting requirement for AMS funds is that LEAs must submit a final expenditure report following the conclusion of the 3-year expenditure period. And so for the 2023-24 allocation, the end of that 3-year period is approaching. So for 2023-24 AMS funds, all funds must be expended by June 30th, 2026. And so this will be the first time that LEAs will be submitting their final expenditure reports for AMS funds. And so this final expenditure report, it will be available for LEAs to complete on the AMS portal for the 2023-24 allocation from May 1st through September 30th, 2026. And so as you can see in the screenshot, the required information for this final expenditure report, it includes the 2023-24 allocation amount, the amount of funds expended by the LEA, and the amount of unexpended funds. And then also keep in mind that any unexpended AMS funds will be collected by the CDE and then allocated to all LEAs in the following fiscal year. So monitoring and tracking AMS funds, it's essential to ensure compliance with legal requirements. Also to ensure proper accounting of the 3-year expenditure window and to prevent unspent funds from reverting back to the state. So LEAs should have some sort of system in place to track the AMS expenditures by allocation year. And so the CDE recommended that LEAs use locally defined SACS function or goal codes, project year, or another methodology such as first in, first out to track these expenditures by allocation year. And so that means that LEAs that did not follow the CDE guidance to establish local SACS codes or some other methodology to track these funds by allocation year will have to then review expenditures over that 3-year window to ensure that they're properly coded to the specific allocation year. Also, LEAs with 500 or more students, remember, must also monitor the AMS expenditures to ensure that it's meeting that 80-20 requirement unless a waiver of this requirement has been granted. And so it's important to keep in mind that this requirement may be met over the 3-year expenditure window. So as we approach the end of the 3-year expenditure window for 23-24 funds, it will be important for LEAs to ensure that they're on track to meeting this requirement, and if not, may want to submit a waiver request. Additionally, LEAs should be monitoring expenditures to ensure that no more than 1% of expenditures were used for administrative cost. And remember, this includes indirect cost. And so as a reminder, AMS funds, remember, are subject to the annual audit process. And so this slide, it includes the components that are verified during the annual audit. And so as you can see, this includes the annual certifications, the annual report, including that it's been posted on the LEA website and also submitted to the CDE. Also, that the LEA has expended AMS funds on eligible arts education program cost, and that the funds were used to supplement existing funding for arts education programs. And then in year 3 of the expenditure period, or in the audit year that the allocation is fully expended, or whichever comes first, remember that auditors will verify 2 additional components. And so the first is compliance with that 80-20 requirement. And again, this is for LEAs with 500 or more students and who do not have a waiver of this requirement. And then the second thing that will be verified is that no more than 1% of the allocation was used for administrative cost. And so the CDE has created AMS audit compliance worksheets to assist LEAs with meeting the Proposition 28 AMS spending requirements. And so we've included the link at the bottom of the slide to these CDE worksheets. Now here we've listed a number of upcoming deadlines to keep on your radar. And so all of the deadlines that were just shared on the previous slides are included in this table, as well as several others related to the Federal Cash Management Data Collection, or CMDC, the CONAP Spring Release, the LCAP and local indicators, and also CalPADS End of Year 1. And so I'm not going to go through all of them, but the most pressing deadline is the CMDC Report 4, which closes today at 11:59 p.m. So it's important to verify with your fiscal office that someone has submitted the cash balance data for this reporting period. And so remember, if an LEA fails to submit cash balance data for a reporting period, the CDE will not apportion funds to the LEA for that period. The CDE will release funding in the subsequent period if the LEA submits cash balance data that warrants the release and if funds have not expired. And so that concludes today's meeting. So thank you all for joining us today. Please take a moment to complete the evaluation for today's meeting, and we truly appreciate any feedback that you're able to provide. Our next meeting will be Thursday, May 28th at 10 a.m. And so if you have any additional questions for us, please leave them in the chat and we will respond in our Q&A follow-up document. So thank you again.